Okay.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Yaslin had a death in the family, so she's not going to be joining us for this evening. And I think we're going to dispense with the approval of the minutes because I won't be back to sign them for, I don't get back until the 30th or maybe the 1st of May. So, so if we can just move into the discussion without objection of the report that I prepared on the Fjord Trail project, and which I hope you've all had a chance to read. I tried to make it, to compress as much information in as I could without it being a 50-page report. And I went back over a lot of the materials that, some of which are available now, some of which are not. For instance, the 2015 preliminary master plan is only the first 10 pages are available, and the details of a consideration of alternatives are not available. I don't know why, but they're not. So, and then to raise a group, as you saw, a series of general questions to see what possibly we might, well, first of all, if we are all of us concerned or if we are not, and what we might possibly do to follow through or follow up on this concern. So I'm just going to throw it open to discussion. I'd like to get your impressions and your thoughts about things. So anyone?
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think when the Fjord Trail project first came, or when I first started to hear about it, it seemed like it was about sort of actually alleviating some of the congestion issues and creating pathways sort of different modes of transportation, more footpath, more pedestrian pathways. And I think maybe what is happening is this reimagination, as you talk about it in the document you shared with us, and the website, and I saw some images of those that I know sort of go beyond that idea of just a connective corridor, with like an amphitheater type area or other, and other sort of nodes. So I think my question is just how much of that is sort of, there's often in design processes, there's often this sort of, sky's the limit phase, which I guess is happening now, a little later than the very initial, but usually that's at the initial planning moments. And then that sort of gets reviewed by stakeholders, such as the different boards and governing agencies of a town, and then also budget becomes an issue, and then all of these kind of get whittled down. That's just kind of a sort of standard procedure. I'm not saying that that's what's happening right now, but I'm wondering if part of the idea of, or I without understanding really how it started and then developed into this, I'm wondering if part of this is just this idea that, creating these marketing images to get people excited and then showing the potential for future development without fully meaning that it's something that is obviously, that is completely planned or going to be implemented. So that's kind of, that was my first impression when I saw the renderings. I said, oh, these look like the initial phase renderings that are usually used to garner support and test the waters and see what's going on from a particular client or community. And then as time goes on, that gets whittled down due to sort of reality. And I think, I guess my, on a sort of personal level, and also as a member of the planning board, what I would love to see this project achieve some of the goals of reducing congestion, providing more amenities for the high load of tourists that come to enjoy this area, without obviously going overboard. And hopefully that can be arrived at as they go through the process of presenting it to the different boards and agencies. And yeah, I'm not sure what our role would be as the planning board, but I'm eager to hear what others think.
Well, you're raising several questions. One is, it's difficult to know at what stage of planning they are, because they have not been very forthcoming, at least over the past 5 or 6 years, as to what the development thought has been. And the reimagining phrase came from Karen Kakala in an interview in The Current, saying that over the past 5 years, and one of her volunteers saying it was all being done behind the scenes, that there was this, she said, a serious reimagining. So we haven't had any concrete insights into what their thinking is since 2015, basically. As to what you rightly point out is very often what happens, and if, for instance, it just happened at Hudson Valley Shakespeare, where you have a grandiose plan that is then, as you say, whittled down. The complications about this particular, from my perspective, with this particular project, is that by starting in the middle, by starting at Breakneck Ridge, in what is, and again, from my perspective, one of the disturbing factors is that for a project that initially was conceived of as limiting difficulties, has now become a project that is meant to attract and potentially to make matters worse through an evolution of concept as a management of pedestrian and vehicular traffic to ways to increase them, adding some total absorption by what's being put forward. And again, if that goes ahead and the increased visitors arrive here, what then does that mean about the choices of Cold Spring in terms of its own planning and its own management of tourism? Is there a preemptiveness, or is there a preemption of those agencies by the project because of the way it's being staged and because of the change in the concept of the project? So I don't have answers to those questions, by the way, but that's in some part a response to your concerns. Sue or Matt?
Matt?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, similar comments is that it's, I don't know what our role is. When it was first discussed, when, as Lara was saying, this was to deal with all the, foot traffic related to hikers traveling to and from Breakneck Ridge, right? To create a
Mhm.
safe path. And now it's kind of morphed into this, high line on the Hudson that becomes its own destination, which creates more people coming. And I guess maybe it creates a safe pathway to get to Breakneck Ridge, but it's doing far more than that now. Um, and you can put 400 spaces up at Duchess Manor, but I don't know what that really does. First of all, it's a very high point. You then have to get down to the river. I mean, it almost seems like you'd need a funicular, or I mean, it's a to get from the elevation of Duchess Manor down to the waterfront. Um, so but back then, when the village was somewhat included in discussions, it was about sidewalks on Fair Street, right, to allow the hikers to go down, and because it was a very limited scope project that had a lot to do with the community being very concerned about hikers on 9D and concern, and just and also the stress on emergency responders and all of that, and so it was really very much a safety kind of people management that has now turned into a vertical park on the Hudson, right, which will create its whole other host of people coming, far more, we don't even know how many more. Look, I mean, one of the most successful projects like this is Walkway Over the Hudson. I think they got 250,000 visitors. I mean, 250,000 visitors in Cold Spring. I mean, I don't know. It's, so, and that was my comment to the minutes. The minutes kind of got a little conflated with talking about the shoreline stabilization versus, my comment there was, I don't know what we can really do about shoreline stabilization. It's a state project. And frankly, I feel like it's looking a gift horse in the mouth as well, because if it really works and they're doing it with natives and not riprap, and, I mean, you certainly can look a gift horse in the mouth, but sometimes you don't get the horse. So I think this one is very different, which is, I don't know where we get involved. I mean, my thinking all along was, if you're going to send all these people, we need things like bathrooms and sidewalks, things that you take ownership of, right? If you are going to inundate it, we can't deal with the merchants' traffic, right? And the merchants' ice cream cups and, and garbage. If we send another people, for a very large crowds, heading north, because we're the southern terminus, or really this, probably the starting point. How does that get managed, right? So the village, but I think first and foremost, the administration, because they're the elected officials. The planning board is not elected; we're appointed. So in my opinion, we shouldn't be kind of guiding policy or stating opinions. We should be waiting for work to be referred to us. If the village board wants us to look at things, or wants reports on things, I think I'm perfectly fine with providing it to them. But obviously, the elected representatives, that's who represents you, for better or for worse, right? That's who you elected. If you think they're not doing a good job, well, then then you elect somebody else next time. But so I think all these concerns are valid. And personally, I feel very strongly about the project. But as a planning board member, I feel like the work needs to come to us, the questions need to come to us, or the village board needs to kind of task us with something. But I think if they will, I think it's great. I mean, I would love to know what our rights are with respect to this development. I mean, it could change the face of Gold Spring in such a way that many people, myself included, would think is very negative, so much so that it might not be a place that you even want to live. I mean, right now, I don't even try to go to Main Street, during season. I can't imagine what it would be like with another attraction that has, a southern terminus in Dockside, right? And especially lower Main, which is incredibly congested, right? It's this old Victorian village that was for carriages and for, if you could afford a carriage, right? I mean, most people were kind of hoofing it around, so I mean, it's not made to handle that kind of traffic. We've got the bridge going over. When you talk about Marathon, how do you get people back into that site, right? So adding more and more pressure on a system that already shows severe stress cracks, right, is not wise. It is, in fact, the opposite of planning, right? It's looking the other way. So yeah, I would love to hear what the planning board is. I just feel like it's not really ours to, in my opinion, it's not ours to, to decide what it is, because we're not the elected officials, right? And what do we know what the current administration thinks of this project, or what their?
It's been very difficult, Matt, to early on. Well, early on, it's not that old in the administration, but early on, my sense was that there was considerable distress of when the terms of the contract regarding dockside became clear, and that here you have a scenario where the village is essentially leasing the property with responsibilities to maintain it and to cover all of the liability associated with it for a period of 10 years, not the capital costs at the beginning, but a project that was developed since 2018, and the design of which has never been, has still not ever been submitted to the village for any meaningful consultation. In other words, we're paying for something that we haven't been a part of designing, nor we have any idea how much it's going to, and when I say we, I just mean the village. Nor do we even know how much the maintenance and liability costs are going to be over the 10-year period, because it's a much more complicated property as it's evolving now. And it goes well beyond shoreline stabilization. And there's a kind of disingenuousness about calling it shoreline stabilization when it appears to be so much larger, and appears to be the Parks Department completing the gateway to Fjord Trail.
Right.
So
it sounds like there are friends in the state, right? And that's
yeah,
that's going to be a real challenge, right?
Yeah, and it was my understanding that the trustees were deeply upset about that. Yet, when there was a presentation made to the trustees by State Parks Department, and I was on that call, Zoom, I was fully anticipating that some of those issues were going to be raised, and none of them were.
Wait, was this was to the town board though, right? Not the trustees.
No, I'm taking it's one presentation back now.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't on Fjord Trail, it was on Dockside Park.
Oh.
By the Parks Department.
Oh, right.
Okay, and but there were still no significant questions, certainly no probing questions from any trustee, to a point that I thought was a little bit embarrassing, that none of them were raised, particularly because I believe they had been raised privately before. So it's hard to judge how the trustees, how the village.
Well, it sounds like tacit support, but again, yeah, I mean, they've got a role to do, and they're the elected officials. But if you and I asked how they're doing on this one, I think we might have a similar opinion. Because if you don't get in front of these things, well, then you get that the train's left the station, right? And I think that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but could it be that, I mean, just to your point earlier, Matt, that the shoreline stabilization project, I know it is sort of punctuating the Fjord Trail in a way, but in a sense, it is something separate and distinct, and also just from a process perspective, it's already underway, and So, I could see where, in terms of spending their resources, again, this is me just conjecturing. It's hard to speak because I haven't really talked to anyone about it. But yeah, maybe it's about, okay, well, this portion is underway. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's tacit approval or it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not going to be a reaction to the new presentation of what the potential fjord trail could be.
Oh,
Unless
because
I'm mistaken.
can I interrupt you? Is that because the presentation to the trustees was just on dockside and the
That's what I thought.
licensees, the
Yeah,
license,
that's what
because we're a licensee, we're not even a tenant,
right.
right? You basically, and all that license gives you is you can do a few things. You might be able to put a toilet on there. You might, and you can't do this, right? But you own nothing. You have nothing,
Mhm.
right? But it sounds like,
But we are paying.
but I am curious as to whether or not others' actions can interfere with our rights as licensee,
Mm.
right? I mean, you can only have one licensee. You don't get multiple licensees. So if they're doing other things related to other projects, I hear what you mean, Lauren. I think that's true. Is that Shoreline Stabilization? I thought Shoreline Stabilization came up separately and far earlier. I didn't think it was going to
Yeah.
go anywhere because I never thought they were going to come up with the money. But
Yeah.
apparently they want to do a study to see if this really works. And they started with, dumping a ton of riprap, which is
Mhm.
really ugly.
Mhm.
And then they came back to natives and calming the waves, and and the drawings look great. Obviously, the renderings don't always look the same as as the as-built condition, but we'll see. But yeah, I think that the village board, as the legislative and executive body, need to get out in front of this, and they need to start pounding on doors and making phone calls to say, we need to see a presentation on this project,
Mhm.
right? And that the village should be very clear that they're, that in their role as elected officials, that they're going to protect the interests of their constituents, right? There is no question that we don't have enough parking. There is no question that the arterial, everything does not work for large crowds, right?
Mhm.
It is an unsafe condition on any given Saturday or Sunday, if you ask me, right? You kind of feel like you're driving through like a Disneyland parking lot where people think you're paying attention to them as they walk out between cars, and they just kind of push strollers through the road, and it's very strange. So to add more people to that mix, because we can't widen the streets, we can't make more roads, we can't make more parking. It's one of the things that has kept Cold Spring the way it is, right? Because otherwise, a lot of these village towns just had urban sprawl, but with the water and fawn stock and the drinking water, I mean, it just kept Cold Spring kind of locked in time, which to many of us, that's the secret sauce, right? The sense of place, right? That it is not like any other place. Partly why, those of us that were on the board at the time and were, came up with the franchise business, restrictions, and, just to kind of, just so you don't feel like you're anywhere. But yeah, I mean, it seems just frankly kind of fantastical to think you could even do this, right? But then again, I also don't understand like the board's response to wanting to close Breakneck, as if the Breakneck station, as if that means people won't come. Well, no, they'll just get off earlier, or they'll drive, right? If they're coming, they're coming, right? So that's not how you manage people. It did seem very much in lockstep with the town, which I have seen quite a bit of recently, which I don't understand. It is not, it's great when we can work together, but our interests are always not aligned, right? Cold Spring has been maintained as a village, and even though talk of dissolving the village, people want to keep the village, right? So I think that, for its own interests. So I think that, I think that maybe we should write a memo to the village board to just express our concerns, right? Maybe you're, starting with your memo, and just say that we want to understand what kind of role the village board and the planning board can support in taking a hard look at this project, before it's too late, right? Because it appears to me that there must be people very high up that like this project and want this project to go forward, right? The fact that somehow Dockside became the southern terminus, when it was always just, no, it's just the Metro North station, right? And all these people are going to get off the train, which was supposed to be, an environmentally friendly, not 400 parking spaces, but people riding public transportation and figuring out ways to safely move them towards the trails, right? This is entirely different.
Mhm.
And I don't even know if they're addressing, the original goals of the project.
Well, I agree.
But at some
I
point it
agree.
may not matter because there's going to be so much new traffic. There's you can't move them anyway,
I agree. I agree with everything you've said, Matt. But Sue, what's on your mind?
In 2016, actually, it's very shortly after we moved to Cold Spring, we went to the presentation by the whole group of people at the chalet near the tunnel, right at the tunnel there. And during that meeting, there were lots of owners, property owners along the tracks and so on, raising questions, saying, what are you going to do with this? How about the privacy? How about, and at that time, it did not really mention anything about Cold Spring, Dockside, and so on. And there was no purchasing of the Duchess Manors and nothing like that. It was more of a natural trail that they would clean up, they would reinforce some bit and try to avoid some of the private owners things and so on. So that's at least that was my impression. And it sounded really quite well. And for nature lovers and for the neighborhood and so on. But we went through the park twice the other day, and we were looking at their working machinery, everything. They were stabilizing the shoreline. That was for sure. Huge pieces of rocks. They were not working really fast, but it's okay. The huge pieces of rock lining up. They already dug the trench and so on. However, looking at the corner, more towards the village truck depot and so on, near the restaurant up a little bit, there is a corner that links with the other part of the shoreline. I could not see how they're going to link it. And if they allow the trail right along the shoreline and the tracks, they are extremely close to the tracks, extremely close. And you basically need to walk on the shoreline rocks in order to avoid the train. So that's first my question, how are they going to manage that? There was apparently no discussion at all about what they're going to do. So that was not included in the original presentation as part of the problems or as part of the potential discussion topics. And then we went through also just last week, 4 times through the trail, the breakneck parking and everything. And the parking they had now, it's new. Last year they did it. I don't know how many cars they could park, but it was full. It wasn't even a weekend. And people walking and people opening the doors all over the place and so on. And then, so we were questioning how they're going to connect that part with the starting in Cold Spring. Are you going to walk there? Are you going to drive there? What are you going to do? How are you going to park that many cars? That's when you drive through, that's my immediate question. We drove through there 4 times. Each time I looked pretty carefully. That's still my question. And as Matt mentioned, Cold Spring itself is Cold Spring, it's as a village. But once this thing is known to everybody, the traffic is something we cannot control. There is a water hole just past Boswell a little bit. And then the New York Times, or whoever weekend page, had a little article about that. And then the next weekend, there were hundreds of cars there. You cannot even park 10 cars there, but there were hundreds of cars there. And people said actually they started fighting for parking spots. And this would be the same situation if we open up like current things without any further planning. So that's my, just, you know, the feeling. And also I agree with the members' comments. What can we do as planning board? So far, it is hard to stop them from doing certain things, but there might be a chance that we can put some ideas or whatever, at least stop some potential bad things from happening or not to extreme extent. However, I agree with Matt is, you know, we are volunteers. What can we do? We don't have authorities. The only thing is we have our opinions, and we're in certain positions that we maybe can raise our voice louder than other people. That's my feeling in general.
All right.
Yeah, I'm wondering, just as I'm listening to everybody discuss, I'm wondering, I think it sounds like the main takeaway is what is our, you know, what is our purview? What is our level of involvement as a planning board, and not as, you know, we obviously each have these sort of individual personal reactions to this sort of moving goalpost of this goalposts of this project, but what do we have the, you know, ability to do? And I wonder, you know, when we look at, and, you know, I think some of the other members might be better able to speak to this, but when we look at how we apply code and how we apply these different rules, right, that have been created and accepted in past administrations to keep businesses and locations well managed and not exerting too much pressure on the infrastructure. You know, one of the main tools that we seem to always use is the parking table tool, which sometimes gets, you know, becomes not applicable. And maybe that's not applicable in this case, but again, I think mainly just kind of, you know, can we fall back on any particular mechanisms or tools that have been that have been determined as part of our purview, either from this idea of, listen, this cannot, you know, there's no way to absorb this level of parking, or there's no way, again, infrastructure, the load on the infrastructure, the bathroom infrastructure, like where are all those bathrooms going to go for that number of people? There's not even like physical space for it. So, I mean, maybe there is, but then you'd be having to build them on undeveloped land. I don't know, is it going to be just a bathroom project? Because really there's already not enough bathrooms, even with the current tourist load, as Matt was talking about. So anyways, I'm wondering what, you know, how do we make our statement as a board concise and just kind of make it about, you know, we just need to understand the load on the infrastructure, and what can we do as the planning board? I'm not sure.
You know, I think that there is a balance that we have to maintain in terms of what our authorities or authorities are. As we know, we are authorized to investigate anything we choose to investigate, which is what this is the beginning of if we choose to go forward. So, and we do need to balance our role as opposed to the trustees' role, because Matt's correct. We're not elected. We don't represent individuals, but we are tasked with safeguarding through the proper strict interpretation of the prevailing rules. We're tasked with safeguarding the underlying platform that law has placed in order to maintain certain qualities of life in Cold Spring. And so we're stewards basically of that, of those pieces of legislation, and we're administrators of the application process that we go through to affect that. I don't think that there's anything in any of that that precludes us from thinking about larger issues, particularly when the larger issues are this large. And I'm not sure that there is anything we can do in the sort of activist sense. But I do believe that we can discuss, we can start a conversation about some of these larger issues before the project has reached the point of momentum that it makes, as Matt said, it makes the conversation irrelevant. I did like his suggestion of our sending a letter of concern to the village board and asking them at the very least what they think we as a planning board should do about this. Because if nothing else, it would leverage some opinions coming out of them, which so far have
Yeah, they have to take a position, right?
Yeah.
You know, you can't, part of politics is making unpopular decisions. You're not going to appease both sides, right? You know, if you don't support this project, and I'm sure the people that do support it are going to have an issue, but the reality of it is we are certainly tasked with, and we should have a common goal of looking at the quality of life. We look at it from a code perspective. Code is all about quality of life. Zoning is all about quality of life, right? I don't think any planning professional, we're not planning professionals rather, but we are well versed in looking at the code and applying the code, could say this does not have a negative effect on the quality of life in Cold Spring, as it's explained to us, right? Really, I mean, these waterfront projects are just wildly successful, right? Especially when there's no cost, right? When you look at, God help us if this thing were as successful as Walkway Over the Hudson, and it would probably be more successful, right? The Hudson Valley painters came here to paint. It's hard to get a look at that view. You open that up for free, right? And you invite a bunch of people to come. I would think they're going to come.
They're going to come, yes.
But we are the ones that have to live with, the consequences of all that. We don't even get any money from the county anymore for garbage, right?
Right.
We're kind of on our own, to kind of host all these guests. And to the extent that we can do it safely, and it isn't a negative, on the residents' quality of life, well, then maybe you consider it. But when it becomes very clear that you can't, right? You can't give somebody something you don't have. We don't have the infrastructure, the roadways, the bathrooms, right? And I don't know what, frankly, again, because we haven't seen a clear picture of this thing, but I don't know what, great. I mean, clearly there's a lot of money. Duchess Manor was bought, and then there's going to be 400 parking spaces. So this thing has some serious momentum behind it.
Mhm.
I think it's perfectly fine for the planning board, or appropriate rather, really, to say the planning board is concerned. We would like to understand your position on this, right? We want to make sure that we are all aligned, right? You could certainly present your report as, as yours. I don't know that we want to go through it and say we all agree with every point, but I think in concept, we all agree that they are basically, demands on resources that are already taxed, right? Not the least of which is, what is the liability on dockside now? My company was just bought out. I'm trying to get contractors with a $5 million umbrella. That's not that much, but the umbrella market is terrible now. So what is this going to cost to make sure that this gift, right, isn't really a liability?
Right.
Right. you know,
Yeah,
and that,
I-
you know, and with that many people, there will be accidents, right? You know, breakneck alone, you know. So, and
Yes.
and again, I don't even know if it's even addressing the original goals of the project, which everybody supported as a community, because we said, hey, can we get these people out of the road? Right? Can we, you know, but that's not going to change until you do things like ticketing, right? That you have to limit the number of people that can go up the breakneck trail, right? Because, and they're finding that in the Adirondacks as well, is that, you know, it's great that people love these natural resources, but sometimes they love them too much, right? And you have to figure out how to strike a balance. The village board needs to take a position as to what they're going to do in their review of this project and how they're going to make sure that they represent their constituents, to make sure that they first understand the majority opinion, right? Is this good or bad, right? And then represent their constituents by fighting for that.
Do we have anything, do we see anything new of their drawings and so on? Because the poster they have next to the train station and so on was still their original thing.
That's correct.
I each time we go through, I would look at it and thinking, where are they linking this and that? So I would like to know if they have anything new as far as the drawing is concerned, where we can point out, you know, this, we have a problem and so on. Because if we just ask, even just the general public, if we only comment on the general concept or the, you know, overall project, it's way too broad, and it is a good project. I you know, personally, I think when they gave us the presentation in 2016, I thought it was a good project. But up to now, especially recently, we had more attention to it, and it seems it's going away or getting way bigger than what they were talking about. And this is just like Shakespeare thing, you know, first it's a tent, and now it's, you know, 10,000 some square feet, the residence and this, and the three faces of different things, it becomes just out of hand. So where are we going to stop it, or can we stop it, or, you know, what? That's my concern. I think even just as a citizen, I would like to see some real things instead of just presentation. Say, oh, this is oh, this is whatever, and then in reality is not.
Well, what I would suggest now is, if, and Karen or Matt, you probably from your experience would know, what I'd like to do is to take a crack at writing a draft memo from the board to the trustees, raising general concerns, and some specifics, but also asking those basic questions that Matt highlighted about, you know, what are your opinions on this? We need to know how we should respond, and you know, the importance of being on the same page on these issues that are fundamental to the quality of the life in Cold Spring. So I would like you all to give me the go-ahead to write that draft. Now, Karen or Matt, can I send everyone a draft?
Oh, on a memo? Oh, you mean for OML? Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we're not taking action. We're not really taking action. We're really just writing a letter.
Okay.
You may want to review it in the next meeting, although you're not here. Although it's not a huge rush. I mean, so much time has passed already. I mean, the board should make sure they agree with every word in the letter. If you're going to say, I think the report could kind of be, well, this is your report. It's the chair's report. The members have reviewed it, and at a very high level, share similar concerns along the same vein, right? Really just all this stress.
Okay, all right, that is, yeah, Sarah?
Yeah, I just think keeping the letter itself as concise, just like really as an abbreviated version of, or just, sorry, not an abbreviated version, but just really addressing this infrastructure load that I think we can all agree on, that is our major concern. And also, I don't know if there's a way to put this, but the idea of the project kind of switching, like it almost feels like a bait and switch in terms of its goals. So, if a project is presented in one way, then gains approval, and then they just switch into something completely different, I think that's kind of a point that could be highlighted, because that's pretty clear. Like objectively, it was one thing, and then now it's something else, and we just want to understand, that everything's thought through. So yeah.
Okay, so that's fine with me. My report was, meant to be background and to get us.
Yeah, it's helpful.
It was very helpful. Yeah.
Okay, so all right, then I will take a crack at writing a draft of such a letter. I'm not going to be at the next meeting. I'll probably send you the draft before the next meeting, but in any case, if we have other business to do, Matt's kindly agreed to chair the next meeting, because I'm going to be in transit that day and I actually can't zoom in on it. Okay.
Okay.
All
Very good.
right. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time, and as always, your thoughts. So,
Good night. Be well.
Thank you all. Thanks, Jack.
Okay.
Lauren,
Good night.
good night.
I guess we're adjourned.
We're trying to, we didn't even say that.
Adjourned.
Okay.
Okay. That was more like a little workshop, I think, than,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
okay.
All righty.
Okay,
Thank you.
good night, everybody.
Good night.